Yo, Short Box Nation. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 407. Thanks for joining us. If you're new, welcome to the show. This is the Short Box Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about comic books and pop culture inspired by comics.
Ever.
My name is Botter, and I've got my right-hand man, the Scottie Pippen to my Jordan, Cesar Cordero.
I'll take it.
Here in the studio with me.
Just don't make me Tony Kukoc.
Wow, a little basketball reference at the top. This might be the most sports we've ever talked in all 407 episodes.
It ends right there.
All right. Now, normally I don't do shout-outs, a lot of shout-outs at least, during interview episodes, but this one person deserves a shout-out at the top. And I want to give a colossal shout-out to the man responsible for the new intro music you just heard. He's a longtime friend of the show. He's a music maker himself. His name is Matthew Vigo, a.k.a. Deathstroke Sound. He makes music. He does audio engineering. He does sound production for films. And he's really talented, all right?
He's Vigo.
Yeah, it's Vigo, all right? He's given us something incredible to set the tone of the show going forward for this entire season. Check him out on Instagram and online. Links to his music and his work is in the show notes. Once again, big shout-outs to Matt Vigo for the new intro music. Appreciate it, brother. Now, on to the show. Today, Shortbox Nation, we've got a guest that is making his Shortbox debut today. And just in time for the spooky season.
Please don't do that.
Wow.
Nope. You are going to herniate a disc. Please don't do that.
You know what?
Is this why we have the spooky green lighting? Like, ooh,
well, you chose the spooky green lighting, which I thought was a good touch.
We've got olive skin.
You're right. Yeah. We need to mask some of the oil. But you heard a little snippet in the intro, and if you're watching the video version of this episode on YouTube, you can probably tell by Cesar's ear-to-ear shit-eating grin that this is someone we are very excited to welcome to the show. I'm talking about the acclaimed horror author and accomplished comic writer, Joe Hill. He's on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I already know the answer to this, but entertain me, all right? Just entertain me.
Why?
How much do you like Joe Hill, and do you remember your first conscious exposure to him?
That sounds so lewd. I don't know why. Maybe I'm perverted for thinking that. He's looking right at me. Haven't spoken to him face to face.
He's backstage. All right, don't ruin the facade.
He's a terrible person. No,
he's backstage.
No, he's great. You know. What if I just answered like that, like Bruce Willis in The Fifth Element, like, no. So, I really like Joe's work. I think he's a fantastic artist, and that word encompasses everything. And first conscious exposure, it's weird because it would have. Probably, I talked with him earlier about Horns, and Horns was more or less my first exposure to his work, and also something that my wife and I bonded over. And
wow!
It helped to kind of like, we talked it out over our first sort of dates and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a cool thing. Not to get all mushy, but
dude, it's spooky season, all right? Like that's way too romantic.
Okay, so I don't know. I picked up a hitchhiker on the side of the road, and he had a hook for a hand. And my wife and I met, and the guy was like, "Hey, do you like Joe Hill?" And I said, "I guess I do, Mister. Don't kill us." And he's like, "That's cool." And then he just left. So is that good? Are you not entertained? Is that good?
Perfect. That's exactly the story I wanted for spooky season.
Okay.
All right. For those of you unfamiliar with the name or could just use like a refresher on his long list of accolades, here it is. Joe Hill has been dubbed a #1 New York Times bestseller so many times that at this point he might as well just change his birth certificate to include that as a middle name. I don't know if that's legal or not, but he's got the accolades for it.
It's legal. It's legal.
He's the author of novels such as Heart-Shaped Box, The Fireman, and Full Throttle. Much of his work has been adapted into TV and film, like his second novel, Horns, which was translated into film in 2014 and stars Daniel Radcliffe. And the Hollywood connection doesn't stop there, because in 2021, his short story, The Black Phone, was also adapted into a movie and stars Ethan Hawke.
Good flick.
And if long form and short form prose wasn't enough of a challenge and accomplishment already, he moved into the realm of comic books in 2007 and co-created the long-running comic book series Locke Key with artistic maestro Gabriel Rodriguez, which netted him his first Eisner Award for Best Writer in 2011. Since then, he's been embraced so well by the comic community that in 2019, DC Comics just gave him his own imprint. All right, they was like, this is a great idea. Let's give him his own imprint.
Is that how it went?
I'm pretty sure. We'll ask him to clarify that. But it's called Hill House Comics, where he curates his own cutting-edge line of horror comics with some of the biggest names in horror storytelling. and we're going to talk to Joe about all of this. So, without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome, for the first time ever, Joe Hill to the show. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Guys, thanks so much for having me on.
It's our pleasure, man.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to hop on.
I like the idea. I like the idea that I have a whole street team of dudes with like hooks for hands. We're just out there roaming the highways of America, trying to push my fiction on anyone who will pick them up. That is the way to sell books.
Joe, they got stickers like Black Flag logos, buddy, all over the place.
Yeah, I don't have that, but I need that.
Joe, you're situated in New England, right?
Yeah, I live in the seacoast area of New Hampshire. I'm a New England guy. I've been up here pretty much my whole life.
Okay.
Yeah.
For someone that has never been to New Hampshire or New England, could you describe it in just a few words? Like, what is New Hampshire and New England like?
It's a lot. It's very densely forested. Pine trees, mountains, old rotting covered bridges. Families like the crew from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a terrific part of the country. I have 18-month-old twins. I'm raising them here, and
oh wow.
And it's the part of New Hampshire I live in. If you throw a stick, it'll hit one writer and bounce off and hit another. Dan Brown lives around here.
Oh, wow.
Da Vinci
Okay.
Code.
Sure,
Jody Bacall lives around here. John Irving moved out just before I moved in, probably because he heard I was coming. I don't know.
That's funny.
Funny. The guy who wrote a separate piece, whose name I'm blanking on, Knowles is his last name. So it's a very literary part of the world. A lot of great independent bookstores, a lot of terrific independent comic stores. Jetpack Comics up in Rochester is an unbelievable comic book superstore. A lot of comic book writers and artists, and so I feel really lucky to be here.
That's cool, man.
Do you have time? I'm kind of guessing the answer is no, considering you have an 18-month-old twin.
Hey, man, my 18-month-old's at home, buddy. Okay.
Do you have time to go to the comic shop? Like, when's the last time you've been to a shop?
Oh boy! Well, we're getting right to the difficult questions, aren't we? When was the last time I walked into a comic shop? Boy, oh boy! Probably the last time I walked into a comic shop was Forbidden Planet in London in the summer.
Oh wow!
And I swept through and I bought a bunch of graphic novels while I was there, and a couple board games.
Nice.
You're wearing a Forbidden Planet shirt, but it's Forbidden Planet New York, which used to be part of the same chain, but because I know I've been going to Forbidden Planet since I was a kid, so I happen to randomly know that they split apart and now they're two separate organizations. So, but yeah, for comic book geeks, Forbidden Planet London is like the center of the world.
Wow.
They've got everything, and great staff, and amazing figures and T-shirts, and about 1 million comic books, and I could stay there all day. Actually, it's one of these places where it's hard to shop because you get overwhelmed by choice.
Yeah.
There's too much to get, so you almost don't know how to get anything.
I had the same feeling. I went to Mile High Comics for the first time in Denver a month or two ago, and same thing. I didn't know what to buy. I was like, this is kind of more like a museum. I don't want to touch anything. I just want to like soak it in and take it in. Do you recall like what trades you had bought? What's like the last couple of comics you bought?
I picked up. I want to say I picked up a Scott Snyder horror run. Because I just read it, but actually I think it was Night of the Ghoul, but actually I think that was a Comixology original, so I don't think I bought that one as a graphic. There was a really great post-apocalyptic graphic novel that I remember picking up, Kali, with just amazing, I think the artist is Robert Samlin, extraordinary art, just absolutely mind-blowing. I probably picked up the Zoe Thorogood,
Lonely at the Center of the Planet.
Yeah, I haven't. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read it yet, but I did read her brilliant adaptation of Rain, which is based on one of my stories, which she did with David Bohr.
Nicely
She's,
done.
I mean, she went out to San Diego. She went out to San Diego this summer as like uh, nominated for something like 6 or 7
Yeah,
Eisner Awards,
she was
and
nominated.
she's
Yeah, she was nominated for 5, and I think she won Best Promising New Comic Artist or something of that regard.
Yeah, she's super young though, and I
Yeah.
think people can expect to see her. She's going to have to clear some space on her shelf because over the next few years she's going to collect a lot of Eisners.
I love this conversation because it sounds to any outsider like we're sportscasters, but for the nerdiest stuff ever.
Yeah, right.
She's got a big future ahead of her. 2 points on the board right now. We've
Chuck,
got a
I
couple
really
of-
see a future for her.
2 Eisners ago, we were thinking the same thing, and I feel like 10 Eisners later, we'll still be thinking she's outstanding. But back to you.
That's good.
I love it.
Joe, I like to usually kick off these interviews by figuring out like your origin story when it comes to comics. And I asked this during our lit chat, but for the listeners that don't live in Jax or weren't there, if you'll entertain us, what was your first conscious exposure to comic books? Like, do you remember that comic that made you a fan of the medium?
Oh, cool, yeah.
Well, there's a couple. I mean, yes, I remember all of it.
Wow.
So the first book that I ever read that was like, not like a Dick and Jane book, was Bring on the Bad Guys, which was a graphic trade collecting the best origin stories of the villains,
Classic.
that Stan Lee had come up with his collaborators, Dicto and Kirby and all the rest of them. And, to this day, Bring on the Bad Guys is still one of my all-time favorite graphic novels. I mean, I've read the covers off that. I've had 2 or 3 copies and just read the covers right off them. Go ahead.
So, no, Joe, I was going to say, it's funny. I was going to bring that up because I had seen in an interview in the past that you had mentioned that book, and I was like, Bonner and I were just talking about these books. Like, because it's
Origins.
like you had... Yeah,
Son
you
of
had
Origins
Stan Lee
and Bring on the Bad Guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Bring on
like
the
you
Bad
had
Guys,
like Stan Lee in your bedroom with you, like, hey, true believer, you want to know about Dread Mamu? We'll turn the page. And you're like, oh, yeah, I do want to know about this guy. What's up with this dude? He's freaking got... And it's like...
Those covers are beautiful, too.
They're so good.
The painted covers, yeah.
So I wanted to ask, because this dovetails right into it, do you still keep an eye out for stuff like that, or have you already bought these things 5 times over in your life?
So my brother and I are both, comic books was something we shared. Our
cool.
comic collection was something, that we both tended and, had lots of, that was the thing that we talked about the most when we were kids. Well, it was good then. It's not so good now because, because the thing is we have 15 long boxes of comics that are sitting in storage and we can't agree. We can't divide the collection because we can't agree who bought what.
Oh, wow.
And so neither of us can have it. So the collection now exists out of reach to both of us.
That's
because
funny.
once he starts making moves like I'm going to help myself to this, then I'm like, that's fine. I'm going to take these. And it gets ugly real fast.
This is like the Hatfield and McCoys over here.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see it's a universal problem, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
For siblings. I'm glad to hear this is a universal problem.
Yeah, my message to little kids is love your siblings, but don't share your comic book collection with them. Because later it's going to be grief. It's going to be a source of constant tension. Don't do it.
I think we got the soundbite to promote this episode.
Yeah. The other sort of early experience with comics was, do you remember the comics that came with little floppy vinyl records in them?
Yes, they were put out by Power Records.
Yep.
I've got a few of them.
Yep.
Like Spider-Man
So there was
and all that.
There was a Spider-Man record and comic that you'd listen to the record and you'd flip the pages to the comic. And I remember he fights Draco the Dragon.
Yep.
And I remember that was like crap your pants scary to me when I was about, when I was really young, 19, no, 6. When I was like 6, you know, I'd listen to like those like cultists chanting Draco, Draco,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
unsettling.
the dragon sort of materialized out of the stars, and Spider-Man's fighting him, and he's like, "No one likes a bragging dragon." And I mean, I just about remember the whole record.
That's freaking great.
Recently, Chris Ryle, who is one of the great guys in the comic business, he's for a long time was sort of the creative editor in chief at IDW Comics.
Mm-hmm.
He's got his own imprint at Image.
Syzygy.
Yep, that's right. And
Mm-hmm.
Chris was actually the best man at my wedding.
Oh wow.
I think for my last birthday, Chris tracked down all those records, the Hulk,
Oh, cool.
Spider-Man, from the very late '70s, and sent me a whole bunch of them. So I
That's a good.
sort of somewhere over on the vinyl shelf, I think I've got them.
That's a good friend right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
it sure is.
Damn, I wish I had one of those.
Chris was the
Cool
editor.
story, dude.
Chris was the editor on every issue of Lock and Key, and of course, Gabriel Rodriguez has been the artist on every one.
Mhm.
Chris was my best man at my wedding, and Gabe designed my wedding ring.
Wow.
Yeah, my wife's wedding ring too.
Wow. How did that happen? I mean, well, yeah.
I asked.
Oh.
I asked. Because the thing is, so for those who have never read it, Lock and Key is a long-running comic. I think we're up to almost 50 issues now, which actually isn't that long, but it's been spread over almost 20 years now. So we just had our 15th anniversary. So Lock and Key is set in the town of Lovecraft, Massachusetts. And it's about a house that's 2 centuries old, Key House. And Key House is filled with impossible doors and magic keys. Every key opens a different door and activates a different supernatural power. In the way of these kinds of stories, there's one key that should never be used, that of course is. There's a villain named Dodge who wants to collect all the keys and wants to have the power for herself. Gabe designed every intricate key and lock that appears in the comic, and many of those keys have since been reproduced as sort of collectibles by a main collectible company called Skeleton Crew. And I knew after seeing dozens of Gabe's ornate, beautifully designed and engineered keys that he would be the guy, to do a really beautiful wedding ring, and he did.
Wow. That is so beautiful.
That's
Man,
really cool.
Talk about some friendship. Joey, you've gone on to, I think you described, I'm trying to recall like what phrase you used when we chatted for the Lit Chat, but I think you described working in comics as the closest thing to being in a band like the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And I was curious, like, do you prefer that team aspect of working in comics, or do you like that, solo writer when it comes to like writing novels and such?
No, I like the team thing. I mean, I have a friend, Josh Friedman, who wrote, he was the showrunner on Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and he's a terrific screenwriter. He did a lot. I think he co-wrote the latest Avatar movie, and Josh is a great guy. But I remember him saying that screenwriters are writers who hate being alone even more than they hate writing. And I always love that quote. And I think there's a little bit of that in people who love writing in comics. Writing is a very lonely business, writing novels and short stories. You spend a lot of time alone in an office with the door shut, just listening to the voices in your head. It's amazing you get paid for that instead of medicated and put in a, that you can spend so much time conversing with imaginary people and actually be rewarded for it. But for me, working in comics, I have sometimes said it's, I can't play an instrument to save my life, but when I work in comics, I can almost feel like what it might be like to be in a successful touring outfit, to be in the Rolling Stones, to be in My Chemical Romance or something, because, I write the scripts, and when I write the scripts, I'm thinking to myself, what do I really want to see Gabe draw? What would be a fun, what's a storyline that will really, lead Gabe to draw something that's going to blow my mind? And, so I write the script thinking about what Gabe can do with it. And then Gabe turns around and starts drawing pages, which are even better than whatever my wildest dreams were, even, on a whole nother level than whatever I was imagining. And then Jay Photos brings in the colors. And I've said before that I think that Jay in some ways is the most ignored part of a really important team, because he's not really just coloring the page. He's actually like a lighter on a film set, lighting the scene. There's a real sense of the way he's bringing, he's not coloring the page, he's lighting the page. And he does things with sunlight. I remember in the second issue of Locke and Key, he did a thing with the haze of sunlight coming through a barred window. And even though you couldn't see out the window, you could feel that it was early fall in New England from the quality of that light, And so we all, everyone in the team does something that excites everyone else. And then we start playing off each other and building up. You have this experience of the story getting built up to something, that was more exciting than whatever you thought it could be when you were going in. And that's, to me, that must be what it's like to play live in front of an audience, or to, go into, a studio and record Beggar's Banquet or something, because you're feeding off each other's energy and creativity and bringing out the best in each other. And it's so much not like work that you could do it all day. I remember feeling like, especially in the early issues of Locke and Key, almost resenting ordinary life when it began to leak in, when I began to be called out to do other stuff, because I just wanted to write the comic. I could have written the comic all day long.
Wow.
Yeah, now all I'm imagining is you with like dyed black hair and eyeliner just
and
away,
My
like,
Chemical Romance, right? Yeah,
a young man.
I've always tried to keep. I'm super goth, but I've always tried to keep it inside. It's kind of the inner. It's kind of my inner goth.
You're doing a great job.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
It's like
I'm wearing the flannel shirt right now, but in my mind, I'm actually. I don't know, wearing like an Edgar Allan Poe, I can't remember what the name of the frilly tie is, but like that tie and stuff.
He's got like the Joy Division tattoo on his chest, like.
I was thinking that Edgar Allan Poe is really he was one of the earliest popular horror writers, and is also probably the last horror writer to make an important fashion statement. Because he just looked the part. He just looked good.
I mean,
he set the template.
Look, if you've been to Baltimore, I mean, he was in a rough neighborhood. He kept it street.
About the guy who's turned up for like over 100 years now, in the cape and the mask, to leave roses on Poe's grave on the anniversary of Poe's death.
We're Southerners. We do not know this story.
Speak for yourself.
So,
from Maryland.
so for over a century, on the night of Edgar Allan Poe's death, a man in a mask, a cape, and a sort of dramatic black hat swoops in from the dark, leaves roses on his grave, and then swoops away. And obviously, it's been going on for a century. So obviously, it's not the same guy. The story is that it was one guy for nearly 50 years, and then it was his son, and that since then there's been a third guy who has stepped in, and that there's about 12 people who know who it is, who have enabled both the entrances and the escapes. Because TV crews would love to get the guy's face, and they've never succeeded. And I think that the cemetery and the people who run the cemetery have also done some stuff to help protect, his secret identity. But that guy is like the closest thing we have in the world to a superhero.
Yeah.
A masked crusader.
He's
a masked crusader who honors the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe.
He's the ghost who walks. He's the Phantom. If it's passed down generationally, it's basically Lee Falk's the Phantom.
Isn't it wild that it's more than one guy? That it was one guy, and then he passed it on to someone else, and no one has ever identified them?
Imagine that training manual. All right, so there's wait, damn it. So here's escape route A. You want to usually take escape route B on Tuesdays.
It's your first day at work,
right?
You're like, look, man, I've never done this before. You'll be fine, kid. Listen, take your smoke break at around 9:30, but don't push it.
Every third year we use the sewer.
Yeah.
Every third year we use the sewer
Oh
escape.
man, that's great. That's great.
Hope you brought your galoshes, kid. Oh man.
I can already tell the rabbit holes and tangents we're going down in this episode is going to be
We're
a lot
having
of
fun.
All right, Joe, back to like origins and you know, just starting out. I was able to find, I think, what might be your first comic credit. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was a 2005 issue of Spider-Man Unlimited, issue 8, with Joshua Ortega on art duties. Do you remember that at all?
The artist Joshua Ortega wrote the backup feature. I wrote the first story. Josh's story is actually, his backup feature is actually quite a bit better than mine. The artist was Seth Fisher.
Okay.
Seth Fisher.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So there's a quite a bit of story here, and I'll try to sort of pack it into the Reader's Digest version. At the time I got the gig to write Spider-Man Unlimited, I was a failed novelist. I had written 4 novels that I couldn't sell to save my life. I spent 3 years writing one, this big epic fantasy novel that was sort of like a George R.R. Martin thing. That book was turned down by every publisher in New York City, every publisher in London, and then for a final kick in the crotch, it was turned down by some publishers in Canada, which I always say is like, no matter how low you've gone, there's always further to fall, And I had actually mostly given up on the idea that I was, that I had a novel in me. I thought, I've spent years at this and I've taken my best swing. I couldn't sell a book, and maybe I'm not a novelist. Maybe I can't do it. And that's okay. A lot of people aren't novelists, and what I had done is I had started to write short stories, and some of the short stories were pretty good. Some of the short stories won awards. One of them got in a best of collection, a best of the year. And it was a ghost story called 20th Century Ghost. That was in a year's best horror. And at the time this was also like pre-modern internet. There wasn't internet. There was like AOL and stuff, but it was like, there was no Google or anything. But I bought a lot of magazines, like Writer's Digest and stuff, looking for opportunities. And somewhere, I don't know where, I came across the information that Marvel Comics had 2 secret tryout titles. One was X-Men Unlimited, and one was Spider-Man Unlimited. And they were bringing in new writers, poets, short story writers, playwrights, to see what they could do in the comic book form. And I wanted that gig. I wanted that gig so bad. And so there was a woman named Teresa Fockerisle, who was sort of their talent scout. And I sent her a copy of 20th Century Ghost in the best of collection and wrote a letter and said, I'd love to take a swing. And she gave me a shot at Spider-Man. The second or third draft of my script wasn't bad. It was okay. But I choked because I was so excited. It was such a big opportunity after having written those failed novels to finally get a shot at writing Spider-Man, who was my favorite superhero and who I'd loved since I listened to the Draco the Dragon record at like 6. It was everything to me. And with every editorial pass, my story became more generic and less fun, until it finally became this almost completely forgettable 12-page Spider-Man story that was saved, that did turn out really well, but not because of me. It turned out really well because the artist assigned to the story was Seth Fisher, a young, impossibly skillful talent, and Seth drew the hell out of it and made all my unfunny jokes really funny. And he made every sequence work, and it became this incredibly fun thing to read. We also had an iconic cover, which has since been used again and again and again to sell Spider-Man. And I'm embarrassed to admit I can't remember who did the cover, but of all the Spider-Man Unlimited covers, we got the one that was absolutely iconic. So you're going to say something about the cover.
Yes, because I am such a Capcom nerd. It is the cover is by a famous Capcom artist by the name of Shinkiro, who did a lot of like Street Fighter and just a lot of this Capcom artwork. It is by far one of my favorite Spider-Man covers ever because I'm a big fan of anytime like manga and video game artists do their take on like classic American superheroes. So this cover, like to your point, listeners, do yourself a favor. If you type in Spider-Man Limited number 8, you're gonna take a look at it. You're gonna be like, oh my god, I've seen that on XYZ things.
Yes, so many times. It's been reused so many times, and and that was on our comic. And Seth inspired me. He started using connections to get me more gigs. He's an unbelievable guy. We were working on another comic together at the time of his death. He died in Japan. He fell off a building at an incredibly young age, leaving behind his wife and infant son. And it was just an absolute stomach punch. And the world really lost, comics really lost a one of a kind talent and a remarkable guy.
His work is freaking fantastic. He did God, in my opinion, he draws the best Mr. Freak.
Fantastic. He did a Fantastic Four series. It was great. He did a terrific Batman series. Wonderful Batman series.
He kind of reminds me of a little bit of Mobius. His line work.
It's very like Mobius.
Oh my gosh. And that's high praise. Anybody who's listened to the show knows we really dig Jean Girard,
Yeah, and so does Gabriel Rodriguez. Just randomly, it's interesting because but I probably a lot. Now that I think about it, I think he's Mobius is kind of the artist that a lot of comic book artists would wish that they were. That look up to as a source of inspiration So.
Joe,
but anyway, so Spider-Man, right? So that's where I broke in, and I was a comic book writer before I was a novelist. I was, it turned out eventually I did have a few novels in me. That's a whole other story. But by the time my first novel was finally published in 2007, I was already well at work on Locke and Key, and I had done 2 other comics, even though they hadn't come out yet, and and for years and years, I did think of myself as a comic book writer who writes novels, not a novelist who writes comic books.
That's so cool, man. That's inspiring, dude.
No, super. And really quick, I want to take it because I've got a follow-up question comic book wise, but I want to take a quick detour because you brought up your first novel being Heart-Shaped Box, which is one that I am currently 120 pages in currently for the first time reading it. And it was a book that my man Cesar here recommended, when I was telling him about, hey, Joe Hill's going to be here in town, the lit chat, what should I read? What would I like? And he was like, dude, you would love Heart-Shaped Box. And I do. I am like, I'm actually thinking about like reading it tonight. I'm like looking forward to reading it. And it got me thinking, this is a weird question, so stick with me here. It got me thinking, for anyone that hasn't read this book, the very high level gist of it is a retired rock star ends up buying a haunted suit, and it causes havoc on his life. It got me thinking about like the haunted shit that I've come across, and I firmly believe Cesar will know this. I've got a fish tank that I firmly believe is fucking haunted. I've had it for years. I don't know why I throw it out. Every fish that lives in it has died.
Dude, seriously,
it's it's just crazy that I don't know. There's something haunted about this fucking fish tank, and it's taken many a goldfish that I've grown fond of. Well, it got me thinking, Joe. I want to ask, do you have any, I guess, interactions? If you had to think of like macabre, what is that word? Macabre? Help me out here.
Macabre.
Sorry. When you think about like your interactions with like the supernatural or macabre, what's been like the closest encounter you've had with that? Do you have like a story like that?
Yeah, I do.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I do.
Cesar almost looked at me like, this is a dumb question. We can go over this.
You said Maccabee. I was it's not Hanukkah, buddy. We're almost there.
But first, do you guys both believe in ghosts?
Ooh. I don't know. I'm of
agnostic on the subject.
I believe whatever Richard Matheson tells me and what dreams may come.
So you.
Same.
So you're doubtful. So you're doubtful about ghosts.
Skeptical, I would say, but I'm not.
So you'd
I'm not
be completely at ease if you had to spend a night sleeping nailed into a coffin in a house where people had been murdered, you'd be fine with that because there's no such thing as ghosts.
So everyone's been killed somewhere. So
right, so it'd be fine.
yeah, I think I would be. I just wouldn't like to. I'm claustrophobic, but I don't know if I'm.
So just listeners should know this is Cesar is ready to spend the night in a coffin in a house. This is your opportunity. Leave comments in the podcast recommending houses where he can spend the night because he doesn't believe in ghosts and he has no reason to be worried. It's going to be fine. He's ready to do it as a community service.
Well, really quick, there's a house down the street I could recommend to you, Cesar.
This is the best part because I'm like sitting here. I'm such a grimy dude, and I love making fun of people. And I'm sitting here like, should I hold back? Because I don't really know Joe like that. You know, I can't just be talking about like that. And I was like, oh, game on, Joe. Game on. You're good. We're good, buddy.
Welcome to the family.
Yeah, seriously. That's funny. Yeah, go ahead.
So Locke and Key was filmed as a pilot for TV on several occasions, and eventually, on the third time's the charm, eventually it was made into a TV series that lasted 3 seasons on Netflix. But prior to that, there was a pilot filmed for Hulu, directed by Andy Muschietti, who directed It Chapter 1.
Yep.
That unaired pilot is extraordinary, brilliant, and terrifying. And it still bewilders me that we didn't get it on screen. It's an absolute, the energy, both the heart and the terror that was embodied in It Chapter 1. Andy carried that right into his pilot for Hulu, listeners are welcome to start their, release the Snyder Cut petition to get Hulu, to throw a couple bucks at the pilot. And actually probably Netflix would have to air it now because I think Netflix, the rights situation might be messed up. But I wish people could see how beautiful and how scary that first pilot was. But before Andy and Barbara made their unaired pilot, Josh Friedman, who I was talking about earlier, made a pilot in Pittsburgh in the winter, directed by Mark Romanek. That would have been about 2010 for Fox. And and at the time I thought, wow, we're going to have a TV show on Fox. This is amazing. And Gabe and Chris and myself converged on Pittsburgh in the winter. I'm getting to the ghost story. There is a ghost story here, but
take
first,
your time, Joe.
Yeah. So we converged on Pittsburgh in the winter, which is where everyone found out that Pittsburgh in the winter is a terrible place to make a TV show. And the biggest reason the show never got on the air was because there was a blizzard that wiped out 30% of the filming. Oh. So they had to staple the pilot together, having only 70% of the script shot. And actually, they did a really good job, but it didn't get on the air. There was a slot for one new show, and it wound up being Alcatraz instead of us. J.J. Abrams is a brilliant filmmaker and TV show creator, terrific storyteller, one-of-a-kind talent. But his show got on the air and my show didn't, so he can get fucked. And I've met him. He was so kind. To me. I actually met him on the set of one of the Star Wars films. He let me sit in the Millennium Falcon. And I feel bad about saying that he can get fucked, but Alcatraz beat out Locke and Key, and so he can, and that there's nothing I can do with that. It's just a fact. But the best part of the Pittsburgh shooting was spending the night in the bar with Gabriel Rodriguez and Chris Ryle and talking about the comic, which at the time was very much ongoing. So for listeners who haven't read it, the whole story, beginning, middle, and an end, Locke and Key is a contained story with a beginning, middle, and an end that took place over 6 books. Since then, there's been more Locke and Key, but if you just wanted to read those 6 books, you would have a completely enclosed, satisfying experience, and you would not feel like, oh, they left a bunch of stuff unresolved. There's full resolution to all the major plot threads, and you get a complete story, like a novel, But we had not finished the series or even close to it in 2010 when the pilot was shot for Fox. And sitting in the bar, we figured out how to end the series. Actually, Gabe figured out how to end the series, only he thought it was silly, so he presented the idea as a joke. And as soon as I heard it, I said, "That's the end. That's how we're going to end it." And we did. So
That's pretty cool.
I can't talk about his solution without spoilers, so I'm not going to do that. Just that there was a remarkable twist that he threw out there as a joke that I instantly knew solved a number of narrative problems. So, and that serves as a reminder that Locke and Key has always been. It was never my story and Gabe drew the pictures. It's always been our story. Where we solve problems together. We figured out those people together. I learned as much about the characters from the way Gabe drew them as he ever learned from the way I wrote them. But so anyway, so I was in Pittsburgh and we saw him film for a few days. And then I decided to drive home to New Hampshire in a rent-a-car. And I started driving. I thought I was going to drive back to New Hampshire in a day. I drove all day and I was still in fucking Pennsylvania. I couldn't believe it. It was like Pennsylvania never ended. I'm like, how big is this state? And so it was closing in on getting dark. And I started thinking I'm going to have to find a hotel. So I did a little looking online and I heard about a hotel in Bethlehem outside of Philadelphia. This hotel was a 19th century hotel, beautifully restored, in a 19th century part of town with cobblestone streets and brick sidewalks and, gas lanterns, gas lamps, but they offered a room with a boo. So the room with the boo was their most haunted hotel room.
That's awesome.
And you could have it for a special price. And I remember calling up my parents and talking to my parents, and I'm like, so what happens if I get the room with the boo, and then they find me the next morning dead in my bed, and my hair has turned completely white from terror?
You did not.
Do you think if that happens, they'll still run my credit card? I mean, I did get what I paid for, but so I called up to book the room with the boo, and they said it's already booked. We have a honeymooning couple up there, and they're very in love, but they're also kind of goth, and they wanted the haunted room for their honeymoon suite, so we can't give it to you. But good news, we can give you the room right under their room, and that one is also haunted. And I'm thinking, yeah, sure it is. Okay, give me the room right under theirs. That's fine. I'm thinking like, yeah, sure. As long as I'm paying, they're willing to give me a haunted room. Every room in the hotel is haunted, whatever. So I got this room and I had a terrific dinner and I could look out the window. There was some snow falling and I could see a gas lantern, and it was like looking back to the era at Edgar Allan Poe. It's just, it was like time travel. Cool. And I went to bed and I woke up at 1 a.m. and there was a woman standing at the foot of my bed staring at me, and I couldn't see her. I just knew she was there, and I couldn't move my body, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get away! Get away!" And the honeymooning couple in the room above me went, "Ah!" and fell out of their bed, crashed out of their bed, because they could hear me screaming through the floor. The rigidity of my body loosened up. The sleep paralysis left me. I sat up. There was no one in the room. I turned on the lights. There's no one there. And of course, there is a thing that can happen to you. It's hypnagogic terror, where you wake up, but you're still sort of almost hallucinating because you're still in a dream state and your body is frozen the way it is when you're asleep.
It's happened to me.
Terrible, terribly frightening.
Yeah.
There was no ghost, I don't think. I'm not sure, but the people in the room above me absolutely got their money's worth. Woken at 1 a.m. by a shriek from hell that they could not explain. They got their money's worth.
The funny thing is, like, I was like, "Get away," and it's like you hear their version. Yeah, we heard, "Get away."
Oh yeah. It was not a manly. This was not a manly sort of like command.
Stop it! You get away.
I was like, "Get away." It was pretty. Yeah. I was several octaves up from my normal tone voice.
Joe, I
for sure.
You, man. I had an experience. It was my sleep paralysis demon it looked like a ginormous what's the ghost Pokemon?
A Haunter, Ghastly, Gengar.
It was Gengar.
Gengar.
It was
Gengar.
a huge, like weird, dark looming form with like cat ears, but it had a Michael Jackson mask, like one of those fake sort of styrene-ish plastic, like 60s Halloween mask with the thin string. And it was like Michael Jackson's face, and it was like late 90s Michael Jackson. I'll just leave that there.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I can't move. I can't move. It's just looking at me, and I'm like,
wow. I don't think
All
I've ever
those
heard you tell this story.
It sucks, dude. It sucks so bad.
All those cheap plastic masks from the 80s are actually so much more frightening than the more realistic full head rubber, sculpted. I don't know why. It's the uncanny valley, right? Isn't it the uncanny valley where you're looking at that face and you're thinking,
that's not real.
That's not right.
Yeah, that's
not right. And it would be bad to wake up at 1 a.m. and see someone in like the hoghead mask standing outside your window. That would be bad. But it would be worse. But it would be worse to like look out the window and just see someone in a clear plastic 80s mask, like
just like, hi.
Not good. Not good.
Damn. And I'm sitting over here like the only time my body ever gets rigid and fraught with fear is anytime I open up my electricity bill during the summer. I'm like, get away from me.
You want to know what was a great horror mask was, and maybe this is a good conversation for Halloween. I think maybe one of the best was, I'm going to discount the mask in Black Phone because I'm personally attached. So it's not fair to talk about that. Is a great mask. It was designed
awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It was Tom Savini had a hand in the design, and Jason Baker, I believe is his name. I'm so embarrassed if I got his first name wrong, but it's Jason Baker also did a bunch of the design, and I knew the moment I saw the mask that there was a chance that we were going to have a really special film, that it was going to be really scary.
That's cool.
But so putting aside the Black Phone, because I'm obviously biased there, I think maybe one of the best masks in horror in the last 15, 20 years is the dude in Hush. Have you seen Mike Flanagan's Hush?
Of course.
He doesn't actually wear the mask for much of the film. He actually only wears the mask for about the first half hour.
Right.
That was a creepy fucking mask.
Yeah, it's so funny because my wife and I, we love Mike Flanagan, and we love that he has the same team that he works with as far as actors and
sort of. It's like what is that when a director has the same cast over and over again? They call that a company. Right, like that's it's the Mike Flanagan company. Like a theater troupe.
They're like a theater. Yep, you beat me to it. Yeah, absolutely. So it's like funny seeing like Katie Siegel and Samantha Sloan talking about Midnight Mass before it's even out.
Before Midnight Mass was made,
was a thing, and then to see, like, just it's like, oh my gosh, that's Katie Siegel just chilling out, like being stalked by this freaking creep in this scary ass mask. Like, it's such a good, like, if you guys have not seen this film, it's freaking fantastic. 'Tis the season, and it's
that's a good one.
Film.
That's a good one, and while a lot of people have seen it, I also feel like it's flown a little under the radar. Certainly, I think that we're 23 years into the new century, and I think this has been a great century for horror. It has been the last 23 years has been one. Blumhouse has a lot to. We can thank Blumhouse for a lot of that.
A24,
but A24. There's been a lot but there's been great horror comics. There's been great horror novels. It's just been an unbelievably fertile time for the genre. So it's hard to point at anyone and say. And that person is one of the cornerstones of why it's been so great. But I definitely think Mike Flanagan is one of the cornerstones of why the genre has been so exciting, so vibrant in the last quarter century. Because he's just made, his shows and his movies have so much heart and intelligence, and they're so fucking scary, which is important. But also he also just makes films in an interesting way. He did things with sound in Hush that were, astonishing and fresh. and really exciting. And he brings something special to every film and every show. I've never been disappointed by a Mike Flanagan anything.
So my mom is very she is sort of like in denial about being a horror fanatic. She'll be like, my mom and I are both like born and raised in Puerto Rico, and she's got a real thick accent. And I'll suggest a movie for her or a book for her or anything, and she'll be like, I don't know. Does it have a lot of cussing in it? Is it got and it's like, why are you being coy? Like, I know for a fact when I'm not around, you still consume this stuff, even if this, it's not edited, quote unquote, for television, right? So I was like, I showed her the trailer for Black Phone. I said, hey, check this out. Because she was talking to, because she's watching my baby at home. She's like, who are you going to talk to today? I said, well, Mom, here's some of his work. Here, I have some of his books on my shelf. And I told her a little about you. And she's like, oh, that's so nice, honey. And I said, check out this movie. I think you dig it, Mom. So she saw the preview and she was kind of like, Uy, ay, santo, what? Oh my God, with that mask. Just like that. And it's funny because anybody on the outside would be like, she's turned off. She's probably going to say something judgmental and be like, I would never watch that sort of thing. I know her and I'm just like, my work here is done. Like, because she's going to go right home and look on her little iPad. My dad's going to lumber out of the room like, Anna, what are you doing? What's going on? She'll be like, shh. I'm watching this movie. Don't touch it. Don't talk to me. Don't wake
me. My wife is not a horror film fan. She doesn't like to be scared. That's not. She'll do roller coasters. I don't like roller coasters.
I'm there with you, man. I'll hold the purse. Same. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I'm not going on that thing.
I actually have gotten a little bit better about them, and I've learned a secret about roller coasters. But and she's willing to do like haunted houses with me now. If we get to an attraction and there's like a haunted house or something, she'll usually can be persuaded to go in with me. So we're sort of good about nudging the person to try something. But like we don't push each other too far.
Sure.
But she doesn't usually watch the horror films with me, and we do have an arrangement where I watch one horror film every week. So there's one night a week when that's like horror movie night, and she's like, "That's cool. I've got some reading to do. You enjoy it." Every once in a while, she'll watch the film with me, but it has to be, like a movie from the 1930s is really safe. Like a black and white, like when I'm digging out some real like old classic or something,
before
James Whale or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
This is right. Carl Laemmle's Dracula.
Yeah,
we've got.
One of these movies where it's like, oh no, here comes the mummy. We all better walk a little faster.
Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Cool. It's like,
that's fucking funny.
Boris Karloff's like introducing the movie, hasn't even started yet. It's like, I can't look.
That's good.
I can't.
All right, I want to take us back to comics really quick, Joe, because this entire conversation,
Botter, you could make the argument that without horror there is no comics. I mean, Jack Kirby.
Look, I don't think
Frankenstein's monster.
I don't think
Batman,
there is an argument
Dracula.
to be made.
I mean, it's kind of there.
Well, I want to ask Joe. We've talked about your origin. We've thrown out the names of a lot of Marvel heavy, right? The Power Records,
right.
your first Spider-Man issue.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward by a lot, I'm assuming. How did you end up working with DC, and how did they give you an imprint? Like, what was the inception of Hill House Comics?
So I did a little growing after the days when I loved Draco the Dragon fighting Spider-Man on my little vinyl record.
Good for you.
As a teenager, I had the good fortune to sort of come of age during the Great British Invasion of comics. So we're talking about, Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Jamie Delano, Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
And the thing about the British invasion, a lot of them wrote for what would later become Vertigo. So they were working for DC, but they were writing a kind of comic book that was not like DC's usual bag. And they were doing stuff that was more literary, more sophisticated, with characters represented that we weren't used to seeing represented in comics. And it was very graphic and very scary. A lot of that stuff was so Sandman and Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing were comics that changed everything. It was, the comics that really changed everyone's ideas about what a comic book could do were Sandman, Alan Moore's legendary run on Swamp Thing, Watchmen, of course, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, and what they had in common was they all pushed the envelope, so they were much more adult. Alan Moore, was the first person to say anyone who spends every night climbing into a rubber fetish outfit to get punched is actually gratifying some urges that are kind of disturbing, certainly go beyond just your strong feelings about right and wrong. And, stuff like that was so fresh, and so exciting. And, and I loved it. I just wallowed in it. I just was completely, those were the comics that shaped my ideas about how to write comics. I sometimes say, Gabe and I figured out knew how to write Locke and Key because we both loved Sandman. And after, and I realized that we could use the keys the way Neil Gaiman used dreams, that I could use that element to tell any story. I could do a comedy, I could do a horror story, I could do a tragedy, that those keys, no pun intended, unlocked an almost limitless range of story potentials. So Locke and Key was like a Vertigo title, but it was published by IDW, not DC. I was always kind of a good match for DC's darker sort of storytelling. And I had begun to talk to an editor there named Mark Doyle, 6-7 years before Hill House happened. 7 years before Hill House happened, Mark and I began to talk about how I could do a story for them. And at the time I was going to do, and eventually what I wound up pitching them on was Basket Full of Heads, which was a story that I had written the first script for in 2007. And when I wrote it in 2007, I was like, I haven't figured out how to tell this story yet. There's a good plot here, there's a good character, but I don't really know what I'm doing. Fast forward 13 years, and I figured out how to crack the story. And I said, I'd love to do this. And Mark said, what if we did even more? What if Basket Full of Heads was just one title in a whole range of titles that you would sort of curate? And I got very excited about that idea, especially since Vertigo was going away. Initially, I think Vertigo thrived because it was telling adult scary stories. And then it began to drift into telling other kinds of stories, which I also thought were really great. That were artistic and pushing the envelope of what was possible in comics, and just like where they started, but they didn't sell very well.
Yeah.
And there's something about commerce there that I think is interesting. I believe that the kind of stories comics tell best are horror stories, and the numbers prove it. So in the 1950s, the biggest selling comics were not Superman or Captain America. The biggest selling comics were Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. The horror comics wildly outsold the superhero comics, and they were graphic and gory and silly and pretty stupid, and they upset parents. And so in the late 50s, they held a series of congressional hearings on juvenile delinquency. A crackpot psychiatrist named Frederick Wortham.
Dr. Frederick Wortham. Oh, boy.
Dr. Frederick Wortham
Ugh.
basically came out and used his junk science to claim that Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and the horror comics were perverting kids and causing juvenile delinquency. It sent a shockwave through the industry. It led to a lot of people being blacklisted. It destroyed publishing companies. And it led to all of that is terrible, but worst of all, it led to a picture of Batman that was like the Batman we got in the Adam West stories. So like the silly, goofy, fun Batman and Robin.
Right.
which is like the worst Batman. I mean, I kind of like the Adam West show, but still, it's like the worst Batman.
But that's done tongue in cheek. This was done as a result of taking the piss out of the darkness of that made the Dark
They had to
Knight
take
dark.
and nothing could be scary. Nothing. No corpses were not allowed. Ghouls were not allowed. Blood was not allowed.
I think you could even show like thievery, like you couldn't, even like small.
Exactly. Even very, not benign crimes, but even like non-gory crimes. Like a guy in a striped shirt, breaking into a house at night was too, might be potentially. No one really knew what the line was. It was so. And it's fair to say it wasn't government censorship that the comics industry bound together and created a comics code. It was government pressure. So it was, to an extent, it was government censorship in all but fact, and all but it was the result of government pressure. That fight about horror comics presaged every cultural fight we've had since then. It's always the same. Sometimes it gets very depressing to see that there's nothing original happens. It's the same stupid arguments made over and over again on junk science. It was comic books in the 60s. It was hair metal in the 1980s. It was violent video games in the 2000s. It was rap music in the 90s. And it's there's always some hyperventilating politicians backed by some semi-hysterical parent group who thinks that one standard of parenting is the standard of parenting you can apply to every kid, and some industry has to defend itself. And I think that the industries have become a little better actually about defending their cultural products and stuff. But it is very frustrating to see America just sort of recycle the same material over and over again. But anyway, all this is a huge distraction from what I was going to say, which is in the 90s, though, the Comics Code died. It still sort of existed, but it had no power anymore. Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore came in. They fixed comics. Horror comics are booming again. When Mark Doyle said, do you want to do horror comics? And it could be sort of like Vertigo without the Vertigo title. I was like, absolutely. And we had a lot of fun.
So you mentioned EC Comics and your love for them in the past. Did you ever get to meet any of those guys, any of those creators? I met Al Feldstein at Heroes Con, a long time ago. It was before he passed.
I have met Al Feldstein. I did meet Al Feldstein.
What a cool guy.
At Comic-Con, yeah.
Yeah, he, just quiet, unassuming little guy, and I got him to sign a print for me. Of course, it's the classic guy in the suit with the grizzly, zombie behind him in the quicksand, and I was like, You're Al Feldstein. He kind of turned around. He was like, last time I checked, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm starstruck, sir. Could you sign this? And he's like, sure thing, kid.
Damn, he was Ben Grimm and Jack Kirby together.
They all are somehow because all those guys were working dudes. They weren't looking at it like they weren't looking at it like some floofy do hipster. Like this will be worth something one day. Like it's like no.
It was like a blue collar job.
Yeah, I got to put food on the table for my family, so I'm drawing a dude play baseball with another dude's head. This is what I'm doing.
Do you believe how good John Buscema was? And he drew like one of those pages every day.
Goodness.
He just drew he was a machine.
Yes.
Legend.
Yes.
No artist can draw at that level and do a page a day anymore. How could he do it? There's only one way he could do it. He was work for hire, and he needed to keep food in the fridge.
That's it.
Like,
right.
I got to get this page done.
Yeah, it's like yeah.
What was I going to say about that? I met Al Feldstein at San Diego Comic-Con. I met Ray Bradbury there before he died.
Wow, that's great.
Cool.
And
I remember pointing at all of it and saying, all of this is your fault. My favorite EC comic story is they were publishing a lot. They didn't have enough material. And so they began stealing Bradbury stories and just doing Bradbury stories, as their own and doing them in comics. They didn't know that Bradbury read their comics. So Bradbury found that they had been ripping off his stories. Now, he could have called a lawyer, but that's not what he did. Instead, he wrote a letter to William Gaines, and he said, "I just loved the adaptation of
Wow.
Sound of Thunder.
Nice.
It came out so beautifully. You have to reach out to the accounting department because the check got lost in the mail. I haven't received the check yet for the
Smooth.
adaptation."
That's a classy
And
move.
and William Gaines saw that and was like, wrote him back and is like, "The checks are on the way, and we'd like to talk about adapting more." So he moved fast to like, okay, wait a second, I'm not going to let this go. So anyway,
That's great.
I loved Tales from the Crypt. I loved, all the EC titles, and my dad had all of them in hardcover. They were reprinted in the 1980s in beautiful hardcover editions, oversized editions. And so when other kids were reading, like, I don't know, Avengers and stuff, I was reading Tales from the Crypt. I was reading, and I give Frederick Wortham a hard time, because he said, it's going to mess kids up, it's going to warp them for life. Actually, he was right, though. Look at me. I mean, like, I write about dead bodies for a living. I mean, so maybe he had a point, actually.
So I got to ask now, was there anything in your house that was taboo? Has anybody asked this question? Like, was there anything you weren't allowed? Like, yo, okay, Joe, no. We're not doing this in the house. You can't read this. You can't watch this.
No.
Okay.
My parents were, no, I mean, by the time I was 12, I had seen Dawn of the Dead
Okay.
a dozen times.
That's
And I
funny.
remember, I love the film. I had the Steve Jackson board game too, which I loved playing, and I was just insane I was a deadhead. And I remember for my 12th birthday asking if all my friends could come over and watch Dawn of the Dead, and my parents were like, "Sure, why not?" So I threw it on and I was watching it, and I'd seen it a million times. I just absolutely loved it. I'm like, I eat the popcorn and watch away, and I didn't notice that one by one my friends were leaving the room. Until finally, about an hour into the film, I looked around, and the only friend left was my buddy Brian Hannon, who was just lathered in sweat. And he said,
It jacked him up.
I don't think we ought to be watching this. And then he left the room. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to watch the rest of the film by myself. So I did. So that was how I finished my 12th birthday.
That sounds like a very similar story to when Cesar had me watch Tusk with him.
First off,
you psycho motherfucker.
First off, you're not the first person I've done that with, and I totally relate, Joe. I'm that guy that's got a Wendy's triple in his hand while Evil Dead 1 is playing, and
laughing, just laughing,
and all the gross stuff's coming out and fluids, and it's corny.
Yeah.
But if you've never seen it before, it is pretty visceral. If you're not a horror person.
So what's funny is, like, I have a lot of friends who write horror fiction or make horror films, who love the genre. And sometimes, a few of us will all go see a horror film together. And the interesting thing about that is, things will happen, like, some demented hillbilly will, whack someone's head off with an axe, and the whole theater screams, except for me and my buds, because we're all laughing. And I know that's a fucked up response, but I think that when you really love the genre, you're kind of in on the joke, and so the stuff that is normally scary is actually very funny and exciting, and you're sort of like, this is hilarious. I love that. That was great. I'd like to see that scene again. I respond to horror films. I am still very easily scared. I jump, I cry out. I am a great person to watch a horror film with because I react. But I also laugh a lot. I'm the classic reaction is I just about jump out of my shoes and then, in fright, and then fall back on the couch and I start laughing.
Yeah, it's so rewarding to still be that way with the genre. And I think a lot of times people, at least I can't speak for everybody, I'll speak for myself, that the relationship between, I guess, what makes us sort of animals is sort of like being able to look at the dark side, right? Like if you're exposed to a horror movie when you're little, and there's that little part of you that sees the world for not like the way it is, but like kinda like you're like, oh, we're all like capable of bad things, but not
Right.
everybody is a monster. But if you can learn to recognize the darkness and, without getting too meta here, embrace it a little in your own life to help you become a better person, then the more you get exposed to it, the less it scares you and the more insight you get. At least me personally, from scary movies or horror in general as a genre. So seeing like say a movie like Devil's Rejects, where you would see a hillbilly hack somebody,
Yeah.
with the scenario you just described, you could get the laugh because, like you said, not only are you in on the joke, but you're like, yeah, people are like that. Like 100% people are like that. And
Green Inferno, Eli Roth's Green Inferno is so fucked up. And I laughed harder watching Green Inferno than, many a comedy. And I'm not proud of that response, but it's just, I was gonna say, I am friends with a fellow named Matthias Claesen, who is a Danish literary theorist, who specializes in horror. And Matthias wrote a book called How Horror Seduces. Anyone who is a serious fan of the genre will, I think, find that a kind of mind-blowing read, a remarkable read.
Okay.
It's the best nonfiction work about the genre in decades. But if you want to know why we love horror, the answer is evolution. Evolution is almost always the answer to whatever the question is. Evolution almost always turns out to be the answer. So I mentioned at the beginning, I have 18-month-old twins. And what the twins love is when I get down on the floor and I drum my hands and I go, and then they run for me. They squeal with laughter and they run. And they like that. And I'll come around a corner and they squeal and they run away. That's their favorite thing. They can do that for hours.
I can concur that this is also true in my life, buddy.
But you have to ask yourself, why? Why do they want dad to sort of put on a scary face and be silly and sort of chase it? Why do they want to run? Why do they want to play a game where I'm like a predator chasing them and they're like the prey trying to escape? And that's the answer right there, because for hundreds of thousands of years, we were the prey and there were predators. And just like puppies play fight, babies through play deal with potentially terrifying scenarios. So in play, they can safely explore a frightening scenario like, what if an animal was after me? What would I do? I would run. Dad is pretending to be an animal and I'm going to run. This is really fun.
Yep.
But in the wild, it's possible that at some point they might actually see they need to be ready to run. And you can take that and expand that outward into horror fiction. Why do we love horror fiction? Because we can use horror comics or movies or novels as a playground for our imagination. And in the safe playground of our imagination, we can explore scenarios that actually we wouldn't want to live through. You wouldn't really want to be prisoner of that family in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it's probably not going to happen. But through horror fiction, you can begin to think about what you might do if it did. And if all that sounds like a reach, if it sounds like I'm reaching a little bit, one of Matthias's studies, got a lot of international attention. Him and his co-authors were able to show that during the pandemic lockdown, horror fiction fans fared better emotionally than people who don't like horror fiction.
Oh, wow.
If you loved horror films and you loved horror novels, during the lockdown, you almost certainly fared better emotionally than people who hate horror. When you ask yourself, well, why? Why? I think the answer is because horror fans have already lived it. They've already had a chance to think about, what would I do if there was a dangerous pathogen? They've read The Stand. They read Andromeda Strain. They've seen Dawn of the Dead. With infected people walking around trying to bite other people and infect them. And so I think with all that in mind, it's not that surprising to find that horror fiction fans were able to look at the threat of COVID-19 and say, Okay.
Been there, done that.
Yeah,
just,
been there, done that. I'm ready.
You just also explained why comedy works as well.
Yes.
Essentially,
Absolutely.
able to take sometimes dark things and explore them safely within the framework of a murky, smoke-filled room with glasses tinkling and laughing, and just it's okay to be in that space and laugh, which is, I'm sure I know and I know you've probably heard that horror and comedy are both bedfellows because they both require that same sort of, they provide that sort of simulation.
Well, and they both
speak.
They both go right through the frontal lobe to the reptile brain. I mean,
I
talk about this. I talk about this all the time. Horror and comedy are almost exactly the same thing. If you watch Bugs Bunny smash Donald Duck over the head with a sledgehammer, you laugh. Wait, are Bugs and Donald in the same universe, or is it Daffy?
Well, if you're watching Who Framed Roger
Bugs
Rabbit,
and Daffy, Bugs and Daffy are in the same universe. So if Bugs takes a sledgehammer and smashes Daffy over the head, you laugh. If Leatherface takes a sledgehammer and smashes a teenager over the head and blood sprays into the camera, you scream. But it is fundamentally the same scene. You've actually watched the same scene. Your nervous system is coded to respond differently to the cartoon than to the horror depiction. But weirdly, it is the same trigger.
For sure.
So yeah.
Damn. Remarkable.
You didn't know, huh? You didn't know we were going to go this way, did you?
Joe's pulling the best stories out of UC. I haven't heard some of the stuff.
Yeah, man.
We've gone from Draco the Dragon all the way up to
the psychology,
the findings, right? The findings of evolutionary psychology is applied to the horror genre. So we've covered a lot of ground.
As we tap our cigars lightly. Yes.
All right. I do want to.
I lost it for a second. Oh, I'm back. Okay. My computer did a funny thing.
I do want to turn the corner here and go back to Hill House. And I've got, well, for starters, I want to know, because you mentioned that, you mentioned curating, like the line. And what does that mean in terms of comics? Like,
Let me just note that the marketing team at DC is also glad that you were turning the conversation back to the Hill House titles. The bottom of their heart, the marketing team at DC would like to thank you from the bottom of your heart. That
Joe. Look, this is, it's funny. I always make fun of Botter for being like a huge Marvel head and shilling out to Marvel. It's not true, but we both have like little inside jokes about how much we love the House of Ideas. But the fact that you're that Marvel that Mr. Marvel here is like, please, Joe, please, can we go back to talking to DC for God's sake?
Detective Comics to something.
Look. But in a lot of ways, when it comes to superheroes, I'm a Marvel guy. I've always been a Marvel guy.
Don't isolate that quote.
My comic book collection began with me tracking down the Claremont Byrne X-Men's. So I wanted the complete Claremont Byrne. So that's how I became a comic collector. Was collecting everything that culminated in the Dark Phoenix storyline. It was just and Spider-Man 2, was like, I just grew up, loving Spider-Man like so many other kids. It was just, that was my comic.
The DC marketing team right now is like, God damn it.
Dying. I know, it's killing me. I have to say, I'm 51 now. I've loved comic books my whole life. It blows my mind that the whole MCU rests on the foundation of that first Iron Man movie. When I know that Iron Man was a third string superhero for Marvel Comics, he was nobody's favorite superhero. And the most striking thing, the thing everyone remembers about him, was he had this giant porn stash. He had this Burt Reynolds 1970s porn stash, and that was it. He wasn't one of their top tier characters. He wasn't even like one of their second tier characters. I mean, the only thing more ridiculous than the idea that there was a successful film made about Iron Man is the idea that there was a successful film made about Ant-Man.
Right.
Blows my mind. How was that even possible? Or Guardians of the Galaxy, which ran like 7 issues and was, a comic no one even read. I didn't.
Look at this
I've
man.
never met
Dude,
anyone
Look at this
who
man
read.
smiling. Look at
Joe
this
is
man
one of
smiling.
us. That's what I'm
Yes,
getting. Like
dude,
he's got
yes.
it all. The MCU, the comics, and all of that.
Wait. So now let me chime in and say, and so you don't feel alone in this, because I feel like I've been like, no, Joe is my friend. Yes, let's talk about this. But to your point, as far as being a curator is concerned, do you wear an ascot?
Stupid. I knew you weren't going to be serious. I knew you were
No. As far as being a curator is concerned, do you? How do I say this? Because we just got done talking about how awesome horror is and how cool it is to get nerdy about it on a psychological level. Do you find there's sort of like a heavy is the crown sort of thing where you're like looking for things and.
No, and I'm going to say something that will please the DC marketing team.
Let's do it.
Which is when you're ready for an adult scary comic, it's time to leave Marvel behind and go check out what's happening at DC. Okay, so I love if you want to watch people in brightly colored underpants, making jokes and punching supervillains. Marvel's great, but once it's time for something with adult themes that are really scary, that talks about people's sexual lives and adult lives and grief and pain and mortal fear, then you're going to want to turn to something that's a little more grown up, and that's DC Comics, that's the Vertigo line, that's Swamp Thing and Hellblazer and all those great titles, Arkham Asylum and
House of Mystery.
House of Mystery, absolutely.
Hell, I'll throw in Shade the Changing Man just for fun.
All right there.
I don't know, we might be pushing it too far there, but so it was one of the great pleasures in my career that we were able to do a Locke and Key story that crossed over into Neil's Sandman universe, which is the Locke and Key Hell and Gone series, and was such a blast to write, and Gabe took it to another level, which is really saying something if you've ever seen any of Gabe's, earlier art, but then, he just rose to a whole new level, and it's, that was great. As far as Hill House went, it was a lot of fun. I got to work with some seasoned hands, people who are really terrific. I got to work with Mike Carey, who is a terrific British horror and science fiction writer, probably best known for a novel called The Girl with All the Gifts that was made into a pretty good little zombie film. I got to work with Stuart Immonen, which still blows my mind. I actually remember
so good.
when
we
were talking. He's astonishing, an astonishing talent. And I remember talking to Mark Doyle, and he said, he'd seen this first script for Plunge, and he said, "Who do you want to get for the art?" And I said, "Can we get anyone who can draw like Stuart Immonen?" And Mark Doyle was like, "I think we can get someone who draws like Stuart Immonen." And before I knew it, he was drawing the comics. So, that was great. And I'm trying to think. It's been a fun run. Carmen Machado did. I want to apologize to her for just absolutely fucking mangling her name there, but. She did Delolo Woods, which is a really, beautiful, scary and vivid, and there's never been a comic like it. And, that's one I'd like to see. I hope we'll see that one adapted for film or something sometime soon, because it's really great art by Danny, who just, drew the hell out of it. And so we had a chance to do, 5 or 6 books for Hill House, and I found it profoundly gratifying, and I thought we came up with some really good scary stuff. It was like I got to run Blumhouse for a couple of years. Wow. Only instead of making movies, we were doing comics. I got to be Jason Blum for like 2 years.
Pretty cool.
And I did some cheerleading, and occasionally I did some light editing and stuff. But I found I was working with pros. I was working with great storytellers. I didn't really have to do a whole lot except, tell them to keep it coming and write my own titles.
Did you have the Stanley mustache or even the large sort of aviator glasses? And
Yeah, no. I'm not. I have trouble pulling off the mustache. It doesn't really. And what I really want is I want one of these hipster lumberjack beards. But
you got the flannel.
I mean, go for it.
but I can't really pull it off. I've never been able to. It's like my beard comes out a little ways and then just quits.
I
It
feel you.
loses its will to live.
Mine is Patch
Joe,
City.
let's not pretend we haven't seen the jacket covers on some of the
Oh,
novels.
dude,
where
look
you're
at it right
rocking
here.
a sweet, sweet beard.
Yeah, it's not that lumberjack thing that where it projects. I want the one that projects.
Okay, well that's fair. That's fair. You want to look like Sasquatch from Alpha Flight. I understand.
Yeah.
Joe, I want to play a game with you because you're
Sure.
bringing up some of these titles that have come out through Hill House, and you've mentioned some of the titles, so let's just dive into it. I want to hear what words or anecdotes or stories, what immediately comes to mind when I say some of these names.
Okay,
And it's going to be
good.
it's going to be a mix of like creative partners that you've worked with in Hill House and just some of the titles that have come out through Hill House. And I'm very excited to hear your thoughts or reactions.
Talentless asshole. No.
I want to hear. I'm going to say Leo Max, who is the artist for Basket Full of Heads. Your first.
Oh, I love
title
Leo
out of House.
Max. I love Leo Max, and he was so great. He was so great on Basket Full of Heads. He was especially great when we were about 3 issues in, and he was going to draw 6 issues, and then we were 3 issues in. And I was like, "Do you think you could draw 7? Because I can't finish the story in 6 issues." And DC was like, "We're going 7? Okay, we're going 7." So I think even the first couple issues even say on the cover somewhere, issue 1 of the 6-issue limited series, and then it gets to issue 3 and it's like issue 3 of the 7-issue limited series.
That's awesome.
But Leo Max is really great. I loved that the comic sort of looked like one of these 1970s horror films. Kind of had the golden hued look of something like Jaws, or the kind of grain, the kind of visual grain of something like The Exorcist.
Nice.
So he was terrific to work with, and he's also, it also has a feel of like, one of these European comic books.
Oh yeah.
Where the art is both a little more graphic, you're going to go places that are a little more extreme than you're used to, but it's also sort of, comic booky, kind of, a little absurd, a little silly, and I love that too.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say for a lot of folks that was my introduction to, your comic book stuff, and I admitted to you, like I only started reading Locke Key like a month prior to you coming down for that Lit Chat interview. It blew me away, but Basket Full of Heads was, I think, my first introduction to your comic book stuff. And Leo Max, I want to say this might have been his first like American comic book work, but the dude has been
I don't know
up since then.
Yeah, he's great, and I have to say, if someone has never read any of my stuff and wants to get into my comic stuff, hey, you could do a lot worse than start with Basket Full of Heads. I think Basket Full of Heads is a pretty good, introduction to my stuff. It's, the comic worked in the sense of it is a horror story that's a little silly, that's I wanted it to feel like one of these kind of funny 80s gross out films like, Reanimator or Evil Dead 2.
Nice.
And so it sort of has an over the top quality to it. But beneath that, there's a lot of gore. There's a basket full of talking severed heads. There's a lot of stuff going on. But beneath that, it's actually structured like a pretty classical mystery with misdirections and red herrings, and then I think a pretty good final reveal. So I'm proud of the way it came out. Go ahead.
Yeah,
hit me with the next name.
No, I was going to say it has it's weird. It's like a mixture of like old 50s comics and like you said, like William Friedkin shot documentary style type movies.
Yeah.
Like,
so something that looks a little like Deliverance, or
It's I highly recommend it if anybody hasn't
it is
really dove deep into that. Like that's like
top notch stuff.
Yeah, like I want to revisit it.
Okay, I'm gonna switch from a creator to a title that's on Hill House. I'm gonna say the Dollhouse Family. What comes to mind when I say that?
Yeah. So, what comes to mind when you say that? Dollhouses are scary. I mean, I just think dollhouses are naturally lend themselves to horror. Okay. If you're watching a horror film and a child is like goes up the stairs into the attic and there's a dollhouse there, you're like, don't touch it. You just know it's bad, And Mike Carey brought the skills of a novelist to his 6 issues. He tells a story that takes place in 2 or 3 different shifting time frames. It has some great covers. That series, those individual issues had some great covers that were almost like photo effect covers with like puppets and stuff on them, little puppet dolls and everything. And really, you got your money's worth just with the covers. Yeah. So that was a good one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me stick on titles. Let me go to another title. Daphne Byrne by Laura Marks and Kelly Jones, the iconic Kelly Jones.
Yeah, the gloriously pervy Kelly Jones. That guy. No one is better at working a dick into a panel than Kelly Jones.
This is the short box listeners. This is why you signed up.
Soundbite.
I would argue there's no artist in all of comics who's better at subtly working a dick into a page of comics than Kelly Jones. It was always my dream to work with him. He's just as awesome as I thought. He's just as awesome as I thought he would be. I have loved every page of his art, like life itself. I have, well before I ever met him, I was able to buy some pages of Dead Man art that he did. It's this Dead Man series set at a circus. I just love that. Laura Marks is a TV writer who worked on one of the iterations of Locke and Key, and she's a playwright. And I loved what she did with Daphne Byrne, which I also think is kind of like Daphne Byrne is almost like a 19th century, like a Victorian reimagining, a Victorian feminist reimagining of The Omen.
Oh yeah,
that's cool.
Oh yeah.
And so that's I think if there's one of the Hill House series that sometimes gets overlooked, it's Daphne Byrne, but that's a really good one.
Well said. Well said.
He said, this man said he is the best at subtly working in a dick, and then proceeds to go, it was my dream to work with him. It was my absolute dream to work with him. It sounds like something Robert Evans would say.
Top of the hill
like I can see it's like, the thing about Kelly Jones, baby, is that he was good at drawing dicks. And it was a pleasure to work with him.
Top the mountain, baby. Top the mountain.
No one got into the comics business because they suffered from too much maturity. They weren't like,
Facts.
right?
Well said.
Facts.
All right, you've spoken this next name. You've spoken a little bit about him, but me and C are such big fans of his. I just want to hear you talk more about it. Stuart Immonen. I mean, how is it to actually like work with him and get the pages and all that?
Tell us, Joe.
It was amazing. It was amazing. I am proud of the way Plunge came out, and I think it's a really good comic. I wish that my writing had been up to the level of his art.
Oh, wow.
I think that that Stewart delivered one brilliant page after another. You look at his pages and you're like, this is one of the 6 or 7 best artists in comics right now. There are very few people who can work at the level he's working at, and I think the story of Plunge works and is a good story with some good characters and some great moments. And, I love when readers discover it. And I think, there's a whole set of readers where it's like, it's just right in the sweet spot. But I never thought my scripts were up to the level of his art.
Wow.
And if I ever get a chance to take another swing, and work with Stewart again, I would love to try to deliver something even better than Plunge, because it's such a great thing to get to work with a legend like Stewart, and it was so inspiring to see his pages coming in, and I was very fortunate to get to team up with him for a few issues.
Damn, I really appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, no, he's like one of those guys that's artistically a chameleon. Like he's the T-1000 of comic book artists. Like,
yeah,
you could tell him like, hey, draw in this style, photorealistic, and he's just like calibrating, and like now he's got this beautiful photorealistic style that could rival Neil Adams any day of the week. And then
he's
then you're like, okay, give me some, more graphic. Give me Liechtenstein, baby. And then like he'll just go recalibrating, and now it's like very, very very super, super poppy. And you're like, how is this the same person? How can he do this? It's like Art Deco, go, boop, and then like it's freaking phenomenal. If anybody's listening who's never seen any of Stewart's work, like, first off, check out the DC Hill House line there, maybe. Check out Plunge, and then dive deep into Stewart's work.
Shit.
Like he's freaking
next wave.
It's
his
crazy.
X-Men stuff.
Oh, come on.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah.
No, classic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Joe, what else? What's next for Hill House? Like, what's on the horizon? Any upcoming projects, creators coming on board?
Yeah.
Can you share anything?
Well, now we're going to take a turn into sad territory. It's all been fun until here. I'm actually out of comics for the next few years. I've written 4 novels, and I'd like to have at least 10 novels before I'm done being a novelist.
Wow.
I'd like to write at least another 6 novels. And so right now that's my complete focus, is getting the next couple novels written. The next novel, King Sorrow, is done and I'm revising it now.
Okay.
I've got 100 pages of the book that will follow that one, which is called Hunger. And I just want to stack up the next 2 or 3 novels before I get back to comics. And so I think it's going to be a few years.
Okay.
There's some possible exceptions. Chris Ryle has been adapting the novellas from my book Strange Weather for Image. And I would love to script one of those adaptations myself. It would be an adaptation of a novella called Loaded. It's actually set in Florida. That's something I'd love to do. And Zach Howard, who illustrated The Cape, which is an adaptation of one of my stories, has said that he'd like to draw it. And so it would be a chance for Zach and I to work together. And so that's something. But even if I write that I probably won't. That might not be until late 2024 or even 2025. There is a small possibility that Gabe and I have talked for years about a whole nother 6-book run of Locke Key that would be called World War Key, that would jump back and forth between Key House's past and Key House's present, and pick up with some characters after the events of the original run. It might happen. I hope it will happen. And if it does happen, if it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, it could still happen 5 or 6 years down the road.
Sure.
But Locke and Key is a big commitment. We've done some really good books. I wouldn't want to let readers down by doing anything less than giving it my full attention, and I can't do that really while I'm working on the novels. Additionally, Locke and Key, I co-own Locke and Key with IDW Comics. IDW Comics is not in financially good shape, as far as I can tell. I only know what I see from the outside, but it's my sense that it's not a company that's as financially secure as one would hope. That they have struggled a little bit in the last couple of years over the pandemic and so on. I'm rooting for them to get back on their feet and stuff, but I don't know what the future of Locke and Key looks like, because I don't know what the future of IDW Comics looks like. So there's a bunch of there are several cross currents which make it hard to predict about what there might be for the future of Locke and Key. And I'm rooting for IDW, and I certainly hope everything works out, and wouldn't hesitate to work with them again if the window opened and if it looked like we could put together a good package. And who knows? It's very hard to predict the future. But certainly, aside from any other questions, I got a couple novels to write, so that's what I've got to do the next few years. So
that's very cool.
The last Hill House title was Refrigerator Full of Heads, which was a sequel written by Rio Ures to A Basket Full of Heads. It has, at one point in the comic, there's a pickup truck with the severed head of a great white shark attached to it by log chains, and the great white shark's head is still magically alive and eating people. And so, I know people want to read that comic. They want to see that truck with the shark on it. So So Hill House went out with a bang. It had a great final story, and no regrets. We left it all on the field. We're back to sports again.
There you go. There you go.
Joe, well, let me ask you this then, just on some, fanboy fantasy shit right here. If you were given the opportunity to write one character with one or the creative team of your choosing, whether it be from the big two or any character within comics, who would that be? Who would get you out of quasi hibernation?
What a very big question of you to ask.
Well, so the answer is, unfortunately, nothing would get me out of quasi hibernation, because the goal is to get these next few novels written. It doesn't matter what I was offered. If I had, if the window was open to doing comics for free reign, for DC it would be Superman, and for Marvel it would be Captain America.
Oh wow, interesting.
Because I know my profile as I write the scary stuff, but I sort of want to write about that hero who represents the best of what we can be. Someone whose basic decency is unquestionable. Someone with a strong moral compass, who has almost like a childlike belief in right and wrong, in helping people, standing up for kindness and decency. And I'm a cornball, and I find that really moving and powerful, and would love to explore that with one of those big iconic American characters like Superman or Captain America, which in my mind are very similar, actually.
That's not corny at all, man. You know what you sound like? You sound like someone who read comics in the 90s. I'm speaking from experience, and I've had my fill of deconstruction, and I like it. I like it a lot, but it takes. Botter can tell you that my favorite comic book is Astro City, simply because it deals with sort of a reconstructionist view of that sort of stuff, tropes that you've seen before that have been picked apart, and like hyenas on the Serengeti, like just mangled superheroes,
So if you're with the DC Warner Brothers marketing team, this has been a great podcast, and it's over. You can turn it off now. Yeah. Nothing left to listen to. It was terrific. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, DC. Thank you, Warner Brothers. It's over. Time to turn something else on. So the gritty DC films, like after a while, there was so much grit. It was like grit in my eyes. And I mean, do we really want a gritty Superman? A Superman who's like breaking necks and stuff like that. Like, I think I love the Nolan Batman films. I am down with, darker, more adult takes on comic books and stuff. But I definitely think that the DC universe on screen, as depicted, beginning with sort of like Man of Steel, and through, has not really been a lot of fun. And that's why, right? Because it's like, it's just, this is realism, man. This is like super, and I'm like, no, it's not realism. It's a bunch of guys in capes, and so I admire them for wanting to do something that was not Marvel, by trying to make something distinct. And I do think they had successes, in particular the first Wonder Woman film.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Which wasn't gritty, wasn't like, it was like an embodiment of the character. It was, as opposed, they were like, actually, let's just do, a movie that's really true to the character and stuff. And it was amazing. It was great. I think some of the films that have existed outside that DC universe, Joker comes to mind. I thought, I know Joker has like kind of a bad rap on social media, but I thought it was like the Scorsese films from the 70s. I thought it was like King of Comedy or Taxi Driver. I was totally into it, and I dug what it was trying to do. And
was it
I'll be right. I don't know.
Howard
I'll be
directed?
right there to see the next one. The next one's got Lady Gaga in it. It's Harley Quinn. It's like going to be done as a musical, and Joaquin Phoenix was amazing, and so um, um, so I think that some of their experiments outside of that main line of the DC universe have been really good. I heard Suicide Squad was awesome. It's James Gunn. I haven't seen that one, so I'd really like to check that one. I heard it's great.
It's fun. It's fun.
It is excellent. It's like one of my favorite superhero films in a long time. Like blew my expectations.
I heard Peacemaker. I heard Peacemaker was great too, and I haven't seen that.
Hilarious.
The Max show.
So good. Yeah, those two films. Yeah, you can't not go wrong with Suicide Squad and the Peacemaker show.
So I should watch them together, right? You watch Suicide Squad and then you watch Peacemaker.
Because it leads.
I want to watch. Yeah, I'm down for that. I'm down.
And you're only doing yourself a favor, I guarantee you.
Well, you mentioned Grant Morrison and the British Invasion, right? Like it's interesting that guy who he's thrown his hat in the arena of deconstructing superheroes, but then because he's so magical and whimsical, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, magic with a K, and I love that man so much.
Yeah.
He takes Superman, and he makes him like sort of he creates a magical sigil and brings out all the hermetic energy from Superman, and then just says, "Here you go, populace. Enjoy your superhero as the Buddha." Because if he is godlike,
All-Star Superman is it's one of my favorite comics of all time.
Yeah.
So just a couple things. So the best Superman movies, the top 3 are Superman 2 with Chris Reeves, the first Superman with Chris Reeves, and then the trailer for Man of Steel. The 5-minute trailer for Man of Steel that includes Russell Crowe essentially reading Grant Morrison's bit from All-Star Superman, where he's like, one day they will follow you into the light. I mean, just thinking about it, I get all these goosebumps on me. I'm like, I'm ready to start crying.
My gosh.
I forgot about that trailer.
Dude, when Kevin Costner is like talking to him, he's like, "Can I just keep pretending to be your son?" He goes, "You are my son."
You are my son.
I was like,
so let me just say, I have a wonderful dad. I love my dad. I wouldn't trade him for anything. But if I had to pick a second dad, I'd pick Kevin Costner from Man of Steel, because I've sort of always wanted Kevin Costner to hug me, and then I can ask him, "Can we just pretend I'm your son?" And he can get like that choke in his voice, and he could stroke my head and say, "You are my son." That would be fucking awesome.
Gosh.
That would be the absolute best.
I just want him to hold his hand up against me.
Well, guys, you've been listening to Daddy Issues, the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Our guest has been Joe Hill, and we'll be back with cookies next week, and we'll just cry it out. Thanks for coming.
Next week we have Christina Aguilera on the show as well.
Oh, shit.
Okay. All right. Joe, I got one more question for you to wrap this up. This excellent conversation at that. We're coming up on 20 years since your first short story collection, 20th Century Ghost, since it's been published. And I'm sure not even sure, I know that we have a lot of aspiring writers and comic creators listening to the show. And I always like to end on this note right here. But what words of wisdom or advice would you give to someone listening right now that wants to be, that wants to get published or enter the industry, maybe based on something like you wish you would have been told as you were entering the industry? Like, do you have any advice or tips or anecdotes to share?
This is we're wrapping things up, and this is the place for me to say something inspirational,
profound,
and I'm drawing an absolute blank. I mean, read a lot, read widely. I guess I think it's important to recognize what you love. Because if if there's something you love, you can write that. You can't write something because you think it's going to sell. You can cause that's not enough to keep going. It's too empty. You have to figure what absolutely pumps up your gonads, and that's what you're going to write. See, I did find something inspirational. I did find something inspirational to say at the end.
I don't think I've ever seen an inspirational quote with the word gonads in it, but I'm here for it.
Sweetheart, Joe Hill said I need to pump up my gonads. By God, I'm going to write the great American novel.
I'm going to work that into a funeral speech at some point, or a wedding speech.
Right. Yeah. So, but the other thing I would say is, if you ever find yourself stuck, I get asked a lot about writer's block. And, I've known for a lot of years that writer's block isn't a real thing, that it doesn't really exist. When you get stuck, it's because there's something you want to write and you're not giving yourself permission to write it. Because you're thinking, oh, what if my mom read it? What if my mom read it and then found out the truth about me? First of all, your mom already knows. And second of all, if you don't write the thing that's burning a hole in you, your creativity, your imagination will just take its ball and go home. It would just say, we're writing this or we're not writing anything. So you have to follow that. You have to follow their things, if you want to write, there are things you love, there are things that excite you, you have enthusiasms, there are things that terrify you deeply. That you have to go into that place and face those things and spend time with them. And if you can do that every day, and also if you can read a lot, especially the stuff you love, though, if you're not, if you're out of school, if you're not in college, you're not in high school anymore, it's time to stop doing homework. It's time to stop reading books that you think other people want you to read, or to read books because you think it's worthy, because you think it's going to impress someone. Don't read a book because you think, I don't know, it's going to make you a superior intellect. Just read a book because you think it's going to be fucking awesome, because it's like, you love horror novels. And so you're going to read one and then you're going to read another one, read the stuff that psychs you up, that, and you can almost always, that is a trail of breadcrumbs through the woods that will lead you where you want to go. Or it will lead you to a house made of gingerbread where an old woman will shove you in an oven and eat you, But one way or another, you're going to get someplace interesting.
Somewhere LeVar Burton is like, fuck yeah.
Yeah. It's like, but you don't have to take my word for it.
That was really well said. Joe, this has been one of, I think, this is a Hall of Fame interview right here.
Yeah, man.
This is a lot of fun.
Thanks for spending time with us, and thank your family for us,
sure.
letting us, take you for a while and talk about lizard brains and
all that good
stuff. It was
all
a lot of fun.
Stuff.
I have occasionally been dipping my head to look at the top of my head because I don't spend this much time looking at myself in video, and I've been noticing I kind of have that Snape hairline going on.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that exactly.
Did you say
I could pretend
Snape? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. Professor Snape. I'm sort of doing the Professor Snape thing with my hair, which is not actually awesome. But, but hopefully most people will enjoy this as a podcast that they listen to instead of watching the video.
Well, if you just spend the rest of the time just talking like this, perhaps.
That is a great Rickman.
Come on, he's got it all.
I've done a lot of Alan Rickman in the past.
Joe, toss C something.
Don't do that.
For a voice. Just first thing that comes to mind. I bet you he can do it.
No.
Telly Savalas.
Who loves you, baby?
He says, Telly Savalas says in Cape Fear, old film adapted from a favorite John D. MacDonald novel.
Oh,
he says to Gregory Peck, "This man is an animule, and you got to fight him like an animule." I was like, it's not an animal, it's an animule, which actually sounds like the title for a comic, like some guy can change into a mule and back the animule.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Cape Fear. Gosh, Joe, it's my I love the John D. MacDonald. I love the old version. I was like, I was just talking about this movie with some coworkers who had never seen it, and they just saw it, and I was randomly dropping. It's funny because I'm in the military, so we're all just weirdos in uniforms, and we're doing our jobs, and I just run by and I go, "You put the law into my hands, counselor, and I'm gonna break your heart with it." And I just run away, and they're like, "Hey, he's did the thing. He did the thing.
Stupid.
He's doing the thing."
This is good.
Boy, I'll tell you what, you want to meet some nerds who love comics and role-playing games, hang out with some military dudes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God!
Those
no
are good.
Kidding.
Those are good 8 years I had. Met a lot of nerds. All right, Joe. One last thing. I'm gonna have links to your socials, to the website. That'll be all posted in the show notes. But do you have anything else you wanna plug or say to the listeners before we wrap up?
Now's the time.
Or Well, I got a short story, an Amazon original right now called The Pram. That's part of their creature feature collection. That includes new short stories by Josh Malerman and Grady Hendrix and Paul Tremblay and Jason Mott and Chandler Baker. It's a really fun collection. I hope people will check it out. The Hill House books have all been collected into like trade paperbacks, and I think if you buy the box set, you can get the backup feature called Sea Dogs, which is a fact-based story about how America beat the British Empire by using werewolves during the Revolution, and it's all true. Yeah, and I hope that people have a great Halloween, and get a good scary film in, and stay safe, and make sure to eat plenty of your kids' candy. Make sure none of it's poisoned, and take care of yourselves. Be well.
That's the way to do it. Joe, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much. You're always welcome on the Short Box.
Yeah, man, your family.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.